Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I am a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're joined by Roy Bethge and Debi Price, and we're diving deep into the art of feedback. So what it really means, how it's evolved, and how we can shift our mindset to embrace it as a powerful tool for growth. So thank you for joining me, Roy and Debi. To start us off today, can you give us a little brief bio, tell us a little bit about yourselves? Roy, if you want to take it away.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Thanks for inviting me back, Ashley. My name is Roy Bethge. I am an NCBRT instructor and course developer. Been on the team since 2011. In the rest of my life, I'm currently Director of Security for Hard Rock Casino in Rockford after spending 35 years in law enforcement in a variety of positions, retiring in 2023 as Chief of Police for the Village of Cherry Valley.
All right. Thank you. Debi?
Thanks, Ashley. I'm really glad to be here and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Debi Price, and I have been an NCBRT instructor for 2 years and an assessor for just about 1. Prior to that, I was in the field of education where I was an elementary and middle school principal.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us again. So to start us off, to kick off this series, can you give us just your basic definition for feedback in both a personal and professional context? Maybe that's not so basic, but go ahead and take it away.
Go ahead, Roy.
I was hoping you were going to. I'd be happy to. So feedback, I think, is the lifeblood of any organization and any individual that wants to improve, right? Feedback from a simple definition standpoint is information provided by someone to help you improve either processes or systems or, skills, depending on what it is that you're looking for. It sounds overly simplistic, but I just want to make the point that feedback should be meant as a positive rather than criticism, which is something that we see a lot of, especially with the advent of social media, people taking shots at people. That's not what feedback is. Feedback is someone who's in a position to provide positive reinforcement on ways that you can improve your performance.
Yeah, there's something I'd like to add when I think about the personal and the professional context that we're talking about as far as feedback. Where they're very similar is in the fact that it's helping us recognize where it is that we have some gaps, where it is that we can be either better in the workplace or where it is that we could be, a better spouse, a better partner, a better sister, a better mother. And they all really stem from strengths. What is it that we bring that we're good at? And where are those places that we need? We need to have some support, some coaching, some feedback related to improvement.
And if I can add to that, I mean, one of the things, to Debi's point, is really identifying blind spots for individuals. There's a number of models that we'll get into later in the podcast, but identifying blind spots, things that we're not even potentially aware of that we're doing or saying. Debi mentioned that she's an assessor for our instructor development workshop and for our assessor for all of our programs for our instructors. And we spend a lot of time providing feedback to individuals about things that they can, sometimes it's a really minor improvement like filler words, right? If somebody's teaching and using filler words, something like that, or something much bigger. So feedback comes in a variety of sizes, if you will, and both on the personal and professional side. We get and give feedback all the time, whether we're talking to a partner, a spouse, our kids about, food that we like, restaurants that we're going to. From a professional standpoint, it's just a different level of that same kind of food.
Thank you. So kind of breaking it down a little further, what would you consider to be the key components that make up effective feedback?
one of the things that I think about is the specificity, right? Being specific to what it is that you've identified, whether that's in knowledge, skills, or behaviors of an individual. And another important aspect is related to the timeliness of the feedback. Is it occurring right after there's been some observation or there's been some event that's occurred? So timeliness. And then also the focus, and the focus not being on personality, but the focus being on what is the goal? Is it related to a work task? Is it related to a behavior that you have? And that you have credible information that's accurate that you can provide. And we often refer to it as evidence. Those are a few things that I think of. Roy, are there others that you want to chime in on?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. And from a professional standpoint, I think it's important to have some type of a matrix that you're following because, that way you have consistency across the board. For our instructors, we had a set of, we'll call them core competencies for a lack of better terms, that are based on long researched information about what makes someone a great instructor. And then we take that information and we capture it while an instructor is teaching or doing whatever job they're doing. And then we provide specific feedback about how to improve. And then we actually give the instructor an opportunity to use that feedback, whether that's the next day or the next time we're online, and then measure again and provide additional feedback and support. Feedback is useless if it's not used and put into practice, right? Just getting feedback and taking that information and sticking it in a folder isn't helpful. Think about, for example, performance reviews. Anyone who's ever gotten a performance review once a year at work, and I'm sure we're going to talk about different generations and expectations, but how useful is that performance review when you're only getting it once a year and it really isn't put into practice and isn't remeasured?
Think about the effectiveness of feedback is the way that it's delivered so that the individual receiving the feedback can actually hear it.
Yeah, and to your timeliness point, there's another interesting piece that goes with that. I used to tell this story when we were teaching another version of IDW. You also have to make sure that the person that's getting the feedback is ready to receive that feedback. Sometimes, we've had a long day, a long event, things didn't go well, and now is not the time for them to get that feedback. And I've been in that position plenty of times myself. Someone wants to give me feedback right now. Well, right now, I'm still stressed out over what didn't go right or the event. Now is not the best time to give me feedback because I'm not going to hear anything that you say.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. And like you mentioned, Roy, there's been a huge conversation when it comes to the workplace nowadays is the generational differences. So how do you think the approach to feedback has evolved over the past few decades?
Well, that's a great question and not a super easy one to understand and read, right? I think if you break down culture and generations over my lifetime in my late 50s, everything has evolved, right? When I first started in policing in the 1980s, we weren't really a 24-hour world. We were, right? There's maybe one restaurant, two restaurants that were open. Then we evolved pre-COVID, where almost everything was open 24 hours a day. So when someone wanted to get some food or whatever, they would go get it. Well, the same is true of feedback, right? As generations changed and they started playing video games where you get instant feedback on how you're doing in this video game, the expectation really became that feedback is consistent and less formal. At least that's what I've found. Going back to my comment about the annual performance evaluations. When I first got promoted to sergeant, I can't even remember what year that was, 2012, 2013, went to a new shift, midnight shift, after being a senior officer, and started working with a whole bunch of individuals that really didn't know me, that I really didn't know. So my approach was very much similar to the sergeant that I first started policing with, where he was very blunt, rarely ever gave me any substantive feedback for improvement. Just said, hey, go do this. And as long as you're doing this, writing this many tickets, making this many arrests, everything's great. Well, I remember we got to our first performance evaluation after I started almost a year later, and my score wasn't very good, but yet I had met all the metrics that he gave me, this many tickets, this many arrests. So, when I first started as a sergeant, I provided information as to here's what my expectations are. And I found that the officers didn't really do it because a newer generation, mostly millennials at the time, what they really wanted is they wanted a stake in their work. They wanted a say in what it is that they were doing, not that cookie cutter approach. So as I kind of grew and learned more about the process of feedback and really engagement, we would have pretty frequent meetings around a table that we had in our patrol area, having conversations about, Officer X, you have these skill sets or these desires. How about you take these responsibilities for this week? Somebody else would chime in and say, hey, I'll be the ticket writer for the shift for this week. So that feedback loop both helped me understand what wasn't going well, right? Providing new information, and me providing feedback to those officers. And to add on to that, well, I had a young female officer that I was pretty close with. I actually worked with her father long before she got on the job. And one of the things that she told me that will always stick in my mind is if I'm as a supervisor not providing feedback on the call or the incident or the thing that just happened, the officers are still getting feedback. They're getting it from each other, because after they left the call, they went to go get a cup of coffee, or they went to the gas station to have a conversation and sit car to car, and they could self-critique, right? So if I have two officers each with 6 months on, that's a year of experience. This time I had 20 some years of experience, but they were getting feedback, but was it good feedback? And that's when I realized I really need to step up my game to make sure that I'm providing them good and healthy feedback.
I also think about the change of what's changed over time. When I think about feedback, I think about the original purpose was around performance management. What is it that we're doing well in our jobs? And I think over time, what's happened is that it has both the performance management piece, but now it's also about the professional development of the people that we work with as well. So it takes on a new complexity to making sure that instead of just once a year, I'm having a conversation with the people that I work with, that it's happening on a regular basis, whether that's once a week in some organizations, every other week, once a month. But there's this opportunity that I know that's going to be occurring on a frequent basis to share with me where it is that my blind spots might be. What are the gaps in my knowledge or skills? How am I aligned with the broader picture of the organization? And then based on those discussions, what do I need for support as an employee to improve, to get better, to increase my knowledge and skills?
Yeah, and similarly, a great book for your listeners, Ashley, is called Peak by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. I always like to throw some book references in when you invite me to do a podcast, but the two of them have what were probably the best jobs in the world. They got to do research on the people that were the highest performers in every part of life, right? Whether it be athletes, whether it be high-performing CEOs or individuals. Really what they were able to discern was there's three really different kinds of practice. They referred to the first one as naive practice. That's the idea of kind of doing something over and over again with the assumption that you're going to get better at it. I use golf analogies all the time because I'm a golfer, right? I can play golf as much as I want to, but there's probably going to be a cap on how good I can get unless I go to get some help. So after naive practice, we have purposeful practice. And the difference between naive and purposeful is exactly what Debi was just talking about. It's that feedback. It's that consistent loop of feedback. And then the top is deliberate practice, and that involves a teacher. Well, what do you think a teacher is going to do? They're going to give you feedback, and they're going to give you tools to help you grow, right? So three different aspects of how we become the best at whatever it is that we're trying to be best at, whether it's the best instructor, the best firearms person, pick a topic.
As you were saying that, it made me think about, I had watched a video a while ago with Adam Grant. And one of the things that he had talked about was in feedback, there's two different kinds of people, right, related to feedback. One is the cheerleader. So when you say, give me some feedback, and the cheerleader says, oh my God, everything was great, it was super. And then you've got the critic. And the critic is like, they can't remember anything that you did well at all. And so what we're looking for is that coach, where it is that they're able to balance those places where you have some real strengths and those places where it is that you can challenge them to think differently about it.
Yeah, and when you said coach, this popped into my head too, right? We also need to be cautious about the feedback that we give ourselves, right? Debi mentioned the critic. The person is always looking for that thing. How about for ourselves, right? When something doesn't go exactly right, whether it's, again, as an instructor, as a human being, as a parent, we look in the mirror the next time. I bet we're pretty critical of ourselves, right? We have lots to share about how poorly that went. And I think sometimes we need to think about how would an effective coach have a conversation with you in your own head about how to improve that performance. We're overly harsh on ourselves. You'd never, if you were coaching someone, if Debi were giving feedback, and Debi, by the way, is one of the best givers of feedback I've ever met, I am confident that Debi's not going to be yelling the things that I'm saying to myself in my head when that thing didn't go right. So we just need to learn to have some compassion for ourselves. No one's perfect. Life isn't perfect.
Yeah, it's interesting because as an instructor for the instructor development workshop, the IDW classes that are done, whenever it is that we're doing the teachbacks, which are just such an incredible opportunity for people to really take some risks that they may not normally take when it is that they are training in front of a group of learners or participants. And, the first thing after they've done their teachback is the question, so what did you do well? And, sometimes I will have to go back 3 or 4 times and say, yep, I hear that you've identified some places where it is you'd like to make a change, but seriously, what did you do well? And it is that place where, when people have this growth mindset, or when it is about this continuous improvement, that lots of times the first place we go is we're not good enough in what it is we just did. And so we forget that there's some real good things that have occurred.
Absolutely. And so, Roy, you mentioned at the top of the episode kind of the difference between feedback and criticism. But I think a lot of times, if we're not in a certain mindset to accept feedback, we kind of get the two confused, right? So what things can we do to kind of change that perception, maybe the negative perception of feedback, to be more positive and growth oriented?
Well, if it's for us as individuals, I think the key is to be open to that feedback and give people permission to give you feedback, people that you trust. Not everyone is worthy or deserves the opportunity to give you feedback, because often if they're not, that's probably criticism, and that's the stuff that we don't want, right? I frequently tell my kids, don't take advice from someone that you wouldn't go to when you're in trouble. Just because somebody has an opinion doesn't mean their opinion matters. I know that one of the things that I do in my organization is I have individuals that have identified that known me for some period of time that have an open door to give me feedback anytime, appropriate feedback, right? Not come in and yell at me or whatever. But and I think then you start to set and change a culture of feedback. And we can talk about different types of organizations and different types of feedback. One of the things that I talk about pretty frequently, especially from a law enforcement standpoint, is high-performing organizations thrive on feedback. And the example that I use often is, let's talk about the Blue Angels. Everybody knows who the Blue Angels are, right? They fly the nice Navy airplanes and events. If you ever want to do some cool research and watch some of their after-action, not necessarily the private ones they do those as well, but there's some examples of some of the feedback sessions they have afterward. They're pretty brutal with one another, because if they're not, somebody could die, right? They could crash a plane. Same thing with SWAT teams, same thing with military units that are out serving. They give each other feedback where rank doesn't matter, but they have a culture that's developed that. When I was on the SWAT team, the minute we finished a training exercise or an operation, a live operation, we went in private somewhere, and things sometimes got pretty heated. Lives are at stake, right? So that's one kind of organization. Then you have other organizations where it's just a constant feedback loop. But if you look at the highest performing organizations in the world, all of them would thrive on feedback. I don't think you can be successful without a high level of feedback.
I would agree. As you were talking, Roy, and I was listening, it was making me think about Kim Scott, who wrote a book called Radical Candor. Are you familiar with that? And she, she says like every problem in life can be solved by a 2x2 matrix, right? And one of the things that she talks about is the importance of radical candor. And that's where it is that we still care personally and we challenge directly. So we say the hard things and we remember that we need to do it in a way that it can be heard and that it is respectful and it's, it's not mean.
Yeah, and again, separating that from criticism, I think Radical Candor, which is a great book. I had forgotten about it, haven't read it in years, but generally we give positive feedback in public, and we give critical feedback, room for improvement feedback in private. Not always, but certainly depending on what it is, that's something to consider. You don't want to embarrass somebody, put somebody on the spot. Things didn't go well. Those are often meant to be private conversations between individuals.
Absolutely. Well, that about ties up our first episode of this series. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us for this series. I can't wait to dive into more topics. And next time we'll explore the importance of having feedback mechanisms in the workplace. So make sure to join us for that. Thank you again.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.